Hello and welcome to The Essential Reads. My name is Isaac and my goal is to bring to you a bunch of classic audiobooks in an easy and accessible way. We are continuing with Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoyevsky, and this is Part 1, Chapter 5. It's true, I did think of asking Raskolnikov to help me find some work recently. I was going to ask him if he couldn't get me some private teaching or something of that sort. The recollection suddenly dawned upon Raskolnikov. But how can he help me now? Supposing he is able to get me some teaching. Supposing he does have a kopeck to spare, so I can even buy a pair of boots and have my clothes mended. To be able to go and give lessons. Well, what then? What will I be able to do on a few pietek? Is that what I require? It's really rather silly of me to have come to Razumichin. The question of why he had now come to see Razumichin was troubling him even more than he himself was aware. He kept searching uneasily for some ill-omened significance in this apparently most ordinary of actions. Wait a moment. Did I really think I could put everything right just by going to see Razumichin? Find a way out in the person of Razumichin? He wondered to himself in astonishment. He thought and rubbed his forehead. And it was a strange thing that, after a long spell of reflection, there suddenly occurred to him, almost without being prompted, a certain very peculiar idea. Razumichin, he suddenly said, very calmly, as though he had reached some final decision. I'm going to see Razumichin, of course I am. Only, not right now. I'll go and see him the day after it, when it's all over, and everything's begun anew. And suddenly he came to his senses. After that, he exclaimed, leaping up from the bench. Is that going to happen? Is it really going to happen? He abandoned the bench and set off, almost at a run. His original intention had been to turn back and go home. The thought of going home suddenly seemed a horribly repulsive one. There, in his corner, in that horrible cupboard of his, all this had been fermenting within him for more than a month now, and he moved wherever his eyes led him. His nervous trembling had become slightly feverish. He thought he might possibly be catching a chill, for even in this heat he felt cold. Almost unconsciously, prompted by a kind of inner necessity, he began with a kind of effort to scrutinize every object he encountered, as though in a desperate quest of some diversion. But this failed to work, and he kept sinking back into his state of brooding. But when, with a sudden start, he raised his head again and looked around him, he immediately forgot what he had been thinking about a moment ago, and even what part of town he had been walking through. In this fashion, he traversed the whole of Vasily Island, came out onto the Little Never, crossed the bridge, and turned in the direction of the islands. At first, his eyes found the leafy coolness agreeable, used as they were to the dust and slacked lime of the city, and to its enormous, constricting and oppressive buildings. Here there was neither humidity nor stench, nor drinking dens. But soon even these new, agreeable sensations gave way to ones that were morbid and irritating. Sometimes he would stop in front of some dacha, lavishly adorned with verdure, look through the fences and see, far away on the balconies and terraces, finely dressed women, and in the garden, children running around. He was particularly caught by the flowers. He looked at them longer than anything else. He also encountered sumptuous carriages, horsemen and horsewomen. He followed them with an inquisitive gaze, and forgot about them before they even disappeared from view. He stopped in order to count his money. He turned out to have 30 kopecks. 20 to the policeman, 3 to Natasha for the letter. That means I must have given the Marmeladovs 47 or 50 kopecks yesterday. He thought, for some reason totaling it up, but he had soon even forgotten the reason he had pulled the money from his pocket in the first place. As he was passing some sort of eating establishment that looked like a cookshop, it came back to him, and he suddenly felt very hungry. Entering the cookshop, he drank a glass of vodka and had a pie with some kind of filling. He finished it and went on his way. It was a very long time since he had drunk vodka, and it had an instant effect on him, even though he only had one glass. His legs suddenly grew heavy, and he began to feel a powerful inclination to sleep. He turned back in a homeward direction, but when he reached Petrovsky Island, he stopped in complete exhaustion, wandered off the road into the bushes, collapsed into the grass, and fell asleep that very same instant. When one is in a morbid state of health, one's dreams are often characterized by unusual vividness and brilliance, and also by an extremely lifelike quality. Sometimes the scene that is conjured up is a monstrous one, yet the setting and the entire process of its representation are so lifelike and executed with details that are so subtle, astonishing, yet correspond in an artistic sense to the integral nature of the whole, that the dreamer himself could never invent them while awake. Not even if he were an artist in the order of Pushkin or Turgenev. Dreams such as these, the morbid ones, invariably remain in the memory long afterward, and have a powerful effect on the individual's deranged and already overstimulated organism. Raskolnikov had a terrible dream. It was a dream about his childhood back in the little town where they had lived. He was about 7 years old, and he was taking a walk on a holiday towards evening, somewhere beyond the outskirts with his father. It was a grey sort of day, overcast and humid, and the locality looked exactly the way it had survived in his memory. Even in his memory, it had become far more indistinct than it was now in his dream. The little town stood in an exposed position, as on the palm of someone's hand, with not a willow in sight. Somewhere very far away, right on the edge of the horizon, a patch of forest showed up black. At a few yards removed from the town's last kitchen garden stood a drinking house, a very large drinking house that had always produced in him the most unpleasant sensations, amounting almost to fear when he passed it on those outings with his father. There was always such a crowd there. There was so much yelling, laughter, and foul language, so much hoarse and ugly singing, and such frequent fighting. There were always so many drunken and frightening creatures lounging about outside. When they encountered them, he would always press up close against his father, trembling all over. The road passed close to the drinking house. It was a country road, always dusty, and its dust was always so black. On it went, winding and twisting, and after some 300 yards or so, it veered off to the right, skirting the town cemetery. In the middle of the cemetery stood a stone church with a green onion dome. A couple of times a year he would visit the church with his father and mother for Mass, when burial rites were performed in memory of his grandmother who had died long ago, and whom he had never seen. On these occasions, they always took with them some kutya, on a white dish wrapped in a napkin. And the kutya was the sugary sort, made of rice, with raisins pressed into it in the form of a cross. He loved this church with its old icons, most of them without mountings, and the old priest with his trembling head. Beside his grandmother's tomb, on which there lay a funerary slab, was the little grave of his younger brother, who had died at the age of 6 months, whom he had also never known at all, and of whom he had no memory. He had, however, been told that he had a younger brother, and every time he visited the cemetery, he would cross himself above the little grave in religious awe, bowing down to it and kissing it. And this was what he dreamt. He and his father were walking along the road to the cemetery, and passing the drinking house, and he was holding his father's hand and looking over at the drinking house with fear. Something special was going on, and it drew his attention. On this occasion, too, there seemed to be the sound of festive merrymaking. A dressed-up crowd of artisans' wives and peasant women, their husbands and all kinds of riffraff. They were all drunk and singing songs, and by the entrance to the drinking house stood a cart. But it was a strange sort of cart. It was one of those big ones that are usually drawn by great cart horses, and are used for transporting goods and wine barrels. He'd always liked watching those enormous cart horses, with their long manes and brawny legs, moving at a tranquil, measured pace as they hauled along an entire mountain of goods with not a shadow of strain, as though they actually found it easier to move when they had such a load to haul than when they did not. It was a strange thing, however, that in the present instance, one of these massive carts had been harnessed up to a small, thin, greyish peasant jade, one of the kind which, he had often seen this, sometimes overstrained themselves when hauling a tall load of hay or firewood, particularly if the cart gets bogged down in the mire or in a rut, in which the muzhiks always beat so viciously with their knouts, sometimes even about the muzzle and the eyes. And the sight of this would always make him feel so sorry that he would almost burst into tears, and his mother would take him away from the window. But all of a sudden, it started to get very noisy. Out from the drinking house, drunk as lords, shouting, singing, brandishing balalaikas, came some big muzhiks in red and blue shirt, their armyaks thrown over their shoulders. "Come on, get in, the lot of you!" one of them shouted, a man still young with a fat neck and meaty face that was red as a carrot. "I'll take you all! Get in!" Instantly, however, there was a burst of laughter and exclamations. "That old jail'll never make it!" "Come off it, Mikolka! Have you lost your brains or what? Harnessing that little filly to that great cart!" "That little grey mare must be all of 20 by now, lads!" "Get in, I'm going to take you all!" Mikolka said, leaping into the cart first, taking the reins and standing up at full height on the front board. "Matvey went off in the bay this morning," he shouted from the cart. "And this little filly's fair breaking my heart. I feel like doing her in. She eats oats and gives nothing back. Get in, I say. I'll fly there at a gallop. I'll make her gallop." And he picked up his knout, preparing with satisfaction to flog the little grey mare. "Go on, get in, why don't you?" People laughed in the crowd. "You heard him. He's going to fly there at the gallop." "I bet that mare hasn't galloped in 10 years. "But she's going to now. Don't spare her, lads. Take knouts, all of you. Have them ready." "That's bright. Flog her." Roaring with laughter and cracking jokes, they all piled into Mikolka's cart. 6 of them got in, and there was room for even more. They took a fat, red-cheeked peasant woman with them. She was dressed in bright red calico, with chikarin beads and koti on her feet. She was cracking nuts and laughing softly to herself. The people in the crowd that surrounded them were also laughing, and indeed, how could they fail to laugh? A wretched little mare like that going to pull such a load at a gallop. 2 of the lads in the cart at once picked up knouts in order to lend Mikolka a hand. At the cry of "Gee up!" the little jade began to tug with all her might. But not only was she unable to set off at a gallop, she could barely manage to move forward at all. Her legs skittered about beneath her as she whined and cowered under the blows from the 3 knouts that rained down on her to no effect whatsoever. The laughter in the cart and among the crowd doubled in intensity, but Mikolka lost his temper and began to flog the little mare even harder, as though he really believed he could make her gallop. "Let me have a go, lads," a young fellow who had now got a taste for the thing shouted from the crowd. "Get in, all of you get in!" Mikolka shouted. "She'll take us all. I'll flog her." And he lashed her till he hardly knew what he was doing in his frenzy. "Papa! Papa!" he cried to his father. "Papa, what are they doing? Papa, they're beating the poor little horse." Come along," said his father. "They're drunk, playing mischief, the fools. Come along, don't look." And he tried to draw him away, but he broke loose from his father's arms, and, beside himself, ran over to the little horse. But by this time the little horse was in a bad way. It would gasp, stop moving, start tugging again, and then nearly fall down. "Flog her to death!" cried Mikolka. "It's come to that. I'll do it myself." "What's the matter, what devil? Not got a Christian heart in you?" an old man called from the crowd. "Have you ever seen a little jade like that pull such a load?" another man added. "You'll do her in!" shouted a third. "Leave me alone! She belongs to me! I'll do as I like with her! More of you get in! All of you! I'll damn well make her gallop!" Suddenly, a loud volley of laughter rang out, drowning everything. The little mare, unable to endure the intensifying rain of blows, had begun an ineffectual kicking of her hind legs. The old man could not repress a bitter smile. It was true enough. A wretched little mare like that, yet she could still kick. 2 more lads in the crowd each took another knout and ran over to the little horse in order to whip its flanks. 1 lad ran to either side. "Whip her on the muzzle! On the eyes! On the eyes!" Mikolka shouted. "A song, lads!" Someone shouted from the cart, and everybody in the cart joined in. A song with dubious words rang out. A tambourine rattled, and there was whistling during the refrains. The woman went on cracking nuts and laughing softly to herself. He was running alongside the little horse. Now he was a few steps ahead of it. He could see it being whipped across the eyes. Right across the eyes. He was crying. His heart rose up within him. His tears flowed. One of the lads who were doing the whipping caught him on the face with his knout. He felt nothing. Screaming, his hands working convulsively, he rushed towards the grey-haired old man with the grey beard who was shaking his head and condemning the whole scene. One of the peasant women took him by the arm and tried to lead him away, but he tore himself free and ran back to the little horse once more. Even though by this time it was at its last gasp, it was beginning to kick again. "What's the matter with you?" Mikolka shrieked in a fury. He threw down the knout, leaned over, and hauled from the bottom of the cart a long, thick cart shaft. Took hold of one end of it in both hands, and with an effort proceeded to brandish it over the little grey mare. "He's going to kill her!" The shout went round. "He's going to do her in!" "She belongs to me!" Mikolka shouted, and swung the shaft down at full force. There was the sound of a heavy blow. "Take the whip to her! Why have you stopped?" Voices shouted from the crowd. But Mikolka was brandishing the cart shaft a second time, and another blow landed with full force on the back of the unfortunate jade. She sank right back onto her hindquarters, and then leapt up again and started tugging with all the strength she had left in various directions in order to get going with her load. But whichever way she moved, she was greeted by 6 knouts, and the cart shaft rose and fell a 3rd time, and then a 4th in measured rhythm, with all its wielder's might. Mikolka was in a frenzy of rage because he was unable to kill her with a single blow. "She's certainly got some life in her," the shout went round. "She'll fall down in a minute, lads. It's all over with her now." One versed in such matters called from the crowd. "Take an axe to her, for God's sakes! Get it over with quickly!" cried a 3rd. "Ah! I'll make you eat those flies! Let me through!" Mikolka shrieked violently. Throwing down the shaft, he leaned inside the cart once more and hauled out an iron crowbar. "Watch out!" he cried, and with all his might he swung it down on his poor little beast. The blow thudded down. The little mare began to totter, sank down, tried to give another tug, but the crowbar again came down on her back, and she fell to the ground, as if all her 4 legs had been cut away from under her at once. "Finish her off!" Mikolka shouted, leaping out of the cart as though he no longer knew what he was doing. A few of the lads, who were also red-faced and drunken, seized hold of whatever they could lay their hands on, knouts, sticks, the cart shaft, and ran over to the dying mare. Mikolka stood to one side and began to beat her on the spine with the crowbar at random. The jade stretched her muzzle forward, uttered a heavy sigh, and died. "That's the end of her!" People shouted in the crowd. She ought to have galloped. She belongs to me, Mikulka shouted, holding the crowbar, his eyes bloodshot. He stood there, looking as though he was sorry there was no creature left to beat. It's right enough. Anyone can see you haven't got a Christian heart in you. Many voices were now shouting from the crowd. But the poor boy was beside himself. With a howl, he forced his way through the crowds towards the little grey mare, flung his arms round her dead, bloodied muzzle, and kissed it. Kissed her on the eyes and lips. Then he suddenly leapt up and rushed at Mikulka, hammering at him with his little fists. At that point, his father, who had been chasing after him for a long time, finally seized hold of him and carried him away from the crowd. Come along, his father said to him. We're going home. Papa, the poor little horse. Why did they kill it? He sobbed, but his breathing was choked, and again those howls escaped from his constricted chest. They're drunk. They're up to mischief. It's none of our business. Come on, his father said. He flung his arms round his father, but his chest felt so tight, so tight. He felt he wanted to draw breath, to scream, and woke up. He woke panting, drenched in sweat, even his hair sweat-soaked, and sat up in horror. Thank God, it was only a dream, he said, settling down under a tree and taking a deep breath. But what is this? I must be catching a fever. What an ugly dream. His entire body felt paralyzed. His soul was dark and trembled. He put his elbow on his knees and supported his head in both hands. Oh my God! Oh, God! He exclaimed. Will I really do it? Will I really take an axe and hit her on the head with it? Smash her skull in? Will I slip on her warm, sickly blood, break the open lock, steal the money and tremble, then hide myself covered in blood with an axe? Oh, Lord, will I really? As he said this, he was trembling like a leaf. What's got into me? He went on, hunching up again, as if in deep amazement. I mean, I did know that I'd never have the endurance for this. So why have I been torturing myself all this time? I mean, even yesterday when I went to that rehearsal, I knew yesterday for certain I'd never be able to go through with it. So what am I doing now? Why can I still not make up my mind about it? I mean, yesterday when I was coming down the staircase, I told myself it was vile, loathsome, base. I mean, the very thought of it made me feel sick and gave me the horrors in the real life. No. I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't. Not even if there were no uncertainties and all those calculations. Not if everything I've determined to do this past month were as clear as daylight, as plain as arithmetic. Lord. Not even then could I do it. I mean, I simply couldn't go through with it. I couldn't. That's it. So why? Why, even now? He rose to his feet, looked about him in astonishment as though he were wondering how he had got there, and set off towards TV Bridge. He was pale. His eyes were burning. He was suffering from exhaustion in every limb. But suddenly his breathing seemed to grow easier. He felt now that he had thrown off that terrible burden which had been weighing him down for so long, and his soul began suddenly to experience a sense of lightness and peace. Oh Lord, he prayed, show me my path, and I will renounce this accursed dream of mine. As he crossed the bridge, he looked quietly and calmly at the Neva, at the brilliant going down of the brilliant red sun. In spite of his debilitated condition, he did not even feel tired. It was as though the abscess on his heart, which had been gathering to a head all month, had suddenly burst. Freedom. Freedom. Now he was free from that sorcery, that witchcraft, that fascination, that infatuation. Later on, when he remembered that time and all that had happened to him during those days, minute by minute, point by point, detail by detail, there was always one thing that struck him with an almost superstitious wonder, even though it was something that was, in essence, not really all that unusual. To him, however, it had seemed like some preordained announcement of his fate. Namely, he could not for the life of him understand or explain to himself why in his tired, exhausted state, when the best thing he could have done was to take the very shortest and most direct route home, he should have gone home by the way of the Haymarket, which did not lie on his route at all. Even though it was a small detour, it was nevertheless an obvious and quite unnecessary one. Of course, it was true that he had gone home dozens of times without taking note of the streets he was walking along. But then why, he always wondered afterwards, why should he have had an encounter which was at one and the same time of such important, decisive consequence for him, and of such an extremely fortuitous nature in the Haymarket of all places, where he had not even any reason to be? And why should it have occurred at precisely that hour, that minute of his life, coinciding with precisely that colouring of his mood and with precisely those circumstances which made it quite inevitable that that encounter, should produce the most devastating and lasting influence of his entire personal fate? As though it had been waiting for him there on purpose. By the time he crossed the Haymarket, it was about 9 o'clock. All the tradesmen with tables, trays, stalls, and benches were closing up their establishments, or taking down and clearing away their wares, and dispersing to their homes, in the same way as their customers were doing. Next to the cook shop that occupied the lower floors of the Haymarket buildings, in the dirty and stinking courtyards, and most of all outside the drinking dens, there were jostling crowds of small manufacturers and rag-pickers of every sort. Raskolnikov preferred these haunts, along with all the neighbouring lanes and alleyways, to any other part of town, whenever he went out walking with no purpose. Here, his rags drew no snooty attention, and it was possible for him to go about looking any way he chose, without scandalizing anyone. Right at the corner of K Lane, an artisan and a peasant woman, his wife, were selling goods at 2 tables. Thread, braid, cotton headscarves, and the like. They were also clearing up and making ready to go home, but were being rather slow about it, talking with an acquaintance of theirs who had approached them. This acquaintance was Lizaveta Ivanovna, or simply, as everyone called her, Lizaveta, the youngest sister of that very same old woman Alyona Ivanovna, the collegiate registrar's widow and pawnbroker, in whose home Raskolnikov had been the very day before, when he had gone in order to pawn his watch and perform his rehearsal. He already knew all about Lizaveta, and she even knew him a little. She was a tall, ungainly, timid, and submissive female of about 35, practically an idiot who lived in complete slavery to her sister, and drudged for her day and night, going in fear of her, and even enduring beatings from her. She was standing reflectively face to face with the artisan and the peasant woman, holding a bundle and listening to them attentively. They were explaining something to her with peculiar animation. When Raskolnikov suddenly caught sight of her, a strange sensation resembling the most profound amazement took hold of him, even though there was nothing extraordinary about this encounter. "You'd do best to settle the matter yourself, Lizaveta Ivanovna," said the artisan loudly. "Come and see us tomorrow at about 7. Those folk will be coming here then too." "Tomorrow," Lizaveta said in a slow, reflective voice, as though unable to make up her mind about something. "My, that Alyona Ivanovna's fairly got the wind up you." The tradesman's wife, a no-nonsense sort of woman, began to prattle. "Look at you. You're just like a little infant. She's not even your own kith and kin, just a half-sister, and look at the power she has over you." "Oh, don't you say anything to Alyona Ivanovna about it this time, miss," said her husband, interrupting. "That's my advice. Just come by and see us without asking. It's a good bargain you'll be getting. Your sister will be able to work it out for herself later on, Tomorrow? You want me to come by? Tomorrow at 7. And there'll be some of those folk here, too, miss. You'll be able to settle the matter for yourself. And we'll have the samovar ready, added his wife. Very well. I'll come, Lizaveta said, still reflecting, and slowly she began to move off down the street. By this time, Raskolnikov had passed where they were standing, and heard no more. He'd made his passage quietly, unobtrusively, trying not to miss a single word. His initial amazement had, little by little, given way to horror, as a cold chill ran down his spine. He had learned. He had suddenly, at a stroke, and quite unexpectedly learned, that at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, Lizaveta, the old woman's sister and her sole living companion, would not be at home, and that consequently at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, the old woman would be at home, completely alone. He had only a few paces left to go to the entrance of his lodgings. He went up to his room like a man who has been condemned to death. His mind was completely empty, and he was quite incapable of filling it with anything. But with his whole being, he suddenly felt that he no longer possessed any freedom of thought or of will, and that everything had suddenly been decided once and for all. It goes without saying that even had he spent years on end waiting for a suitable occasion, not even then, assuming he had still the same plan, could he have counted on a more obvious step towards the successful realization of that plan than the one that had suddenly presented itself just then. At any rate, it would have been difficult to ascertain yesterday, with the greatest degree of exactitude and the smallest amount of risk, circumventing the need for all dangerous questions and inquiries, that tomorrow, at that particular time, that particular old woman, on whose life he was preparing to make an attempt, would be at home all on her very own. Thank you so very much for listening. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, share, all that jazz, and if you really enjoyed, do subscribe because there is more to come. This is a really, really long book, but I'm really enjoying it, and I hope you are too. If you're listening on podcast, please leave a review as it helps get this in front of as many people as possible, and reading your reviews really makes my day. You can also share the show and maybe just listen to it while you're sleeping to help me get those delicious, delicious, delicious watch hours on Spotify, or listening hours on Spotify, so that I can finally be monetized there as they've opened it up to Europe, where I live. If you want to support the show in a more concrete way, you can click up here to the Ko-Fi link, which is now on screen, or you can find the same link in the description box, and it's just like an extra way to help me out. It's really, really good, and yeah, it helps in every single way possible to improve this space and make sure I can buy groceries and pay rent, etc., etc., or facilitate those in a more easy way. Anyway, once again, thank you very, very much for listening, and until next time, bye-bye.